Margaret Williams had worked for the Henderson family for 23 years. She started as a young woman of 25, fresh from Jamaica, carrying nothing but hope and a strong work ethic. Now, at 48, she had become more than just a housekeeper in the massive Beverly Hills mansion. She was the quiet guardian of secrets, the keeper of family stories, and the one person Charles Henderson trusted completely. Charles Henderson was not born into wealth. He built his fortune from nothing, starting with a small construction company that grew into a real estate empire worth $8 billion. At 72, he was still sharp as a knife, but his body was failing him. The cancer diagnosis came 6 months ago, and despite the best doctors money could buy, everyone knew the end was approaching. Margaret noticed the changes before anyone else. She saw how Charles struggled to climb the stairs he once bounded up 2 at a time. She watched him push away meals she had carefully prepared, his appetite gone along with his strength. But what struck her most was how he seemed to be preparing for something, making phone calls late at night and spending hours locked in his study with stacks of papers. The Henderson mansion was always busy with visitors. Charles had 3 children from his first marriage and 2 from his second. There was David, the eldest at 45, who ran the construction side of the business. Sarah, 42, managed the real estate investments. Michael, 38, was supposed to handle international operations, but spent more time on his yacht than in boardrooms. Then there were the younger ones from his second wife, Elena. Twins Marcus and Maria, both 28, fresh out of business school and eager to prove themselves. Elena Henderson, Charles's second wife of 15 years, was a former model from Spain. At 45, she maintained her stunning looks through expensive treatments and designer everything. She had married Charles when his first wife died, and while some whispered it was for money, Margaret had seen genuine affection between them in the early years. Lately, however, Elena spent more time at their Malibu beach house than at home. As Charles grew weaker, the family dynamics became more complicated. Margaret observed everything from her unique position. She served meals, cleaned rooms, and listened to conversations that family members thought were private. She knew about David's gambling debts that were threatening his portion of the business. She knew Sarah was secretly meeting with investors to potentially sell her shares. She knew Michael had been embezzling money from the company accounts to fund his lavish lifestyle. The twins, Marcus and Maria, were different from their half-siblings. They genuinely seemed to care about their father's health rather than just his wealth. Margaret often found them sitting by Charles's bedside, reading to him, or simply talking about memories. This kindness reminded her why she had stayed with the family through all the years of drama and politics. What the family didn't know was that Charles had been confiding in Margaret more and more as his illness progressed. During her late-night rounds checking on him, he would be awake, staring out the window at the city lights below. These were the moments when he shared his fears and regrets, not as a billionaire, but as a man facing his mortality. "Margaret," he said one evening as she brought him his medication, "I built an empire, but I'm afraid I failed at building a family." She had learned over the years when to speak and when to simply listen. This was a listening moment. "My children see dollar signs when they look at me now. Elena hasn't shared my bed in months. The company I spent my life building is being torn apart by greed before I'm even gone." His voice was weak, but filled with disappointment. Margaret set down the medicine tray and adjusted his pillows. "Mr. Henderson, you gave them opportunities most people never have. What they do with those opportunities is their choice, not your failure." Charles looked at her with gratitude. This woman from Jamaica, who had cleaned his home and cared for his family for over 2 decades, understood him better than his own blood relatives. What Margaret didn't tell him was that she had been documenting everything she witnessed, not out of malice, but out of a growing concern for what would happen after Charles was gone. She had seen too many wealthy families destroy themselves fighting over inheritances. She had watched the Henderson children's behavior change as their father grew sicker, their visits becoming more frequent, but their conversations focusing increasingly on business matters and future plans. Late one night, Margaret was organizing Charles's study when she discovered something that changed everything. Hidden behind a row of business books was a safe she had never noticed before. The safe was slightly open, and inside she could see documents and what appeared to be several USB drives. She didn't touch anything, but she made a mental note of the location. The next morning, Charles asked her to meet him in the study. He looked more tired than usual, and there was an urgency in his manner that she hadn't seen before. "Margaret, I need to ask something of you that goes beyond your job description," he said, settling into his leather chair. "I'm running out of time. And there are things my family doesn't know, things that will affect their futures and the futures of thousands of people who depend on Henderson Industries for their livelihoods." He paused, studying her face. "I've watched you all these years. You've seen this family at its best and worst. You've kept our secrets and shown loyalty that my own children haven't always demonstrated. I need someone I can trust completely, and you're the only person who fits that description." Margaret felt a chill run down her spine. She sensed that whatever Charles was about to ask would change her life forever. "What I'm about to share with you cannot leave this room until after I'm gone," he continued. "My will, the one the lawyers have, and the one my family knows about, is not the complete picture. There's more to my estate plans than anyone realizes, and you're going to play a crucial role in making sure my final wishes are carried out properly." He opened the safe she had discovered the night before and withdrew a thick folder. "This contains the truth about Henderson Industries' finances, about my children's behavior, and about what I really want to happen to my fortune. Some of what's in here will shock you. Some of it will make you question whether you want to be involved. But I'm hoping that your sense of justice and fairness will convince you to help me." Margaret's hands trembled slightly as she accepted the folder. She had always prided herself on being just the housekeeper, staying out of family business. But Charles Henderson was asking her to step into a role she never imagined. "Why me, Mr. Henderson?" she asked. His answer was simple but profound. "Because you're the only person in this house who sees people for who they really are, not for what they can give you. You've earned my respect and trust through decades of honest work and genuine care. What I'm asking you to do will require both courage and wisdom, and I believe you have both." As Margaret opened the folder and began reading, she realized that the wealthy family she had served for 23 years was built on secrets that would soon be exposed. The billionaire's final wishes were not what anyone expected, and she was about to become the key figure in revealing truths that would change everything. The folder contained documents that made Margaret's heart race. Financial records showed that David had stolen over $3 million from company accounts to pay gambling debts. Bank statements revealed that Michael had been using company credit cards for personal expenses, including a $200,000 watch and monthly payments to a luxury car dealership. Sarah's business dealings included secret negotiations to sell her shares to a competitor, which would have destroyed the family company. But the most shocking discovery was about Elena. Private investigator reports detailed her affair with Charles's personal doctor, Dr. Richard Morse, who had been treating Charles's cancer. The relationship had been going on for 8 months, right around the time Charles's condition started getting worse. Medical records showed that Dr. Morse had been giving Charles stronger pain medications than necessary, keeping him weak and confused during important business meetings. Charles had known about all of this for weeks. The private investigators he hired had been thorough, and the evidence was overwhelming. Margaret realized that the man she had been caring for was not just fighting cancer, but also the betrayal of everyone he loved. "Now you understand why I need your help," Charles said as Margaret finished reading. "My family thinks they're going to inherit everything equally. Elena believes she'll get the houses and half the business. My children from my first marriage think they'll split the company 3 ways, with Elena getting a settlement. None of them know what I've really planned." He handed her a second folder, this one containing legal documents that made Margaret gasp. The real will was completely different from the one the family knew about. Charles was leaving the majority of his fortune to charity, with specific amounts going to organizations that helped working families, immigrants, and small business owners. His children would receive enough money to live comfortably, but not enough to continue their destructive behaviors without consequences. Elena would receive only what the law required, and the evidence of her affair would prevent her from challenging the will. Dr. Morse would face criminal charges for medical malpractice and potentially attempted murder, depending on how prosecutors interpreted his actions. But the biggest surprise was what Charles planned for Margaret herself. "You're receiving $5 million, he told her, "but that's not the most important part. I'm also making you the executor of my estate and the head of the Henderson Foundation, which will manage the charitable distribution of my wealth. You'll have the power to decide which organizations receive funding and how the money is used to help people." Margaret stared at the documents in disbelief. "Mr. Henderson, I don't understand. I'm just a housekeeper. I don't know how to run a foundation or manage millions of dollars." Charles smiled for the first time in weeks. "You've been managing this household and keeping this family together for 23 years. You understand hard work, honesty, and fairness better than anyone I've ever met. The foundation will have lawyers and financial advisors to help with the technical aspects, but the decisions about who deserves help will be yours to make." He explained that his choice was deliberate. His children had proven they couldn't be trusted with money. Elena had shown her true character, but Margaret had demonstrated integrity every single day for over 2 decades. She had seen how wealth could corrupt people, and she understood the value of money because she had worked hard for every dollar she earned. Over the next few days, Charles began preparing Margaret for her new role. He showed her how to access all the accounts, explained the legal processes that would unfold after his death, and introduced her to the team of lawyers and accountants who would help her. Most importantly, he made sure she understood the evidence against his family members and how to use it if they tried to challenge his decisions. The family had no idea what was happening. They continued their regular routines, visiting Charles when it was convenient and discussing their future plans in hushed conversations throughout the house. Margaret continued her duties as if nothing had changed, but inside she was preparing for the storm that would come. David came by more frequently, always asking about his father's business dealings and whether there had been any changes to legal documents. Sarah brought her own lawyer to visit, claiming she wanted to help organize Charles's affairs. Michael stopped by occasionally but seemed more interested in cataloging valuable items in the house than spending time with his dying father. Elena's behavior became even more suspicious. She would disappear for hours at a time, claiming to visit friends or go shopping. Margaret knew from Charles that Elena was actually meeting with Dr. Morse and potentially planning something that would ensure she inherited more money. The medical records showed that Dr. Morse had been pushing for Charles to sign medical directives that would give Elena power over his care decisions. The twins, Marcus and Maria, remained the only family members who seemed genuinely concerned about Charles's well-being rather than his wealth. Margaret felt sorry for them because they would be caught in the middle of the chaos that was coming. 3 weeks after Margaret learned about the real will, Charles's condition took a sudden turn for the worse. Dr. Morse recommended increasing his pain medication and suggested that Charles might want to consider hospice care. Margaret found this suspicious, especially since Charles had been feeling slightly better the previous week. That night, Margaret made a decision that would prove crucial. She started checking Charles's medication more carefully, comparing the pills Dr. Morse prescribed with descriptions she found online. What she discovered made her blood run cold. Some of the medications were not standard cancer treatments. They were drugs that could cause confusion, weakness, and organ failure if given in large doses. She immediately called Charles's oncologist, Dr. Sarah Kim, who had been Charles's doctor before Dr. Morse became involved. Dr. Kim was alarmed by Margaret's findings and agreed to come to the house the next day to examine Charles and review his medications. When Dr. Kim arrived and saw Charles's condition, she was shocked. The medications Dr. Morse had prescribed were not only inappropriate, but potentially lethal. She immediately stopped several of them and ordered blood tests that would reveal what was really happening in Charles's system. Meanwhile, Margaret noticed that Elena was making more frequent phone calls and seemed nervous whenever anyone entered the room while she was talking. She overheard Elena arguing with someone about timing and money, though she couldn't catch all the details. Charles, despite his weakened condition, was still mentally sharp during his better moments. When Dr. Kim shared her concerns about the medications, he wasn't surprised. He had suspected that Dr. Morse was not acting in his best interests, but he had needed proof. Elena and Dr. Morse think they're going to inherit everything and live happily ever after, Charles told Margaret that evening. They don't know that I've been documenting everything and that their scheme is going to destroy them both. He handed Margaret a final folder containing recordings of conversations between Elena and Dr. Morse, obtained through a private investigator. The recordings revealed their complete plan. Dr. Morse would gradually poison Charles with improper medications while Elena played the devoted wife. After Charles died, Elena would inherit his fortune and leave the country with Dr. Morse. They had already opened bank accounts in Switzerland and purchased property in Spain where they planned to live. "This is attempted murder," Margaret said, her voice shaking as she listened to the recordings. "Yes, it is," Charles replied, "and tomorrow we're going to make sure they face justice for it. Dr. Kim has already contacted the police and they'll be here in the morning to arrest Dr. Morse. Elena will be arrested as an accomplice." Margaret realized that her role in Charles's plan was even more important than she had understood. She wasn't just going to execute his will, she was going to help expose a murder plot and ensure that justice was served. That night, Charles asked Margaret to stay in his room. He was afraid that Elena or Dr. Morse might try something desperate if they suspected their plan had been discovered. Margaret sat in a chair by his bed, watching over the man who had entrusted her with his fortune and his legacy. "Margaret," he said softly in the darkness, "tomorrow, everything changes. Are you ready for what's coming?" Margaret thought about her simple life as a housekeeper, her small apartment, and her quiet routine. All of that was about to end. In its place would be responsibilities she never imagined, wealth she never dreamed of, and the power to help thousands of people. "I'm ready, Mr. Henderson," she said. "I won't let you down." The morning arrived with the sound of police sirens. Margaret watched from Charles's bedroom window as 3 police cars pulled into the circular driveway of the Henderson mansion. She had been awake all night, and Charles had slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, knowing that justice was finally coming. Dr. Morse arrived for his regular morning visit at exactly 9 o'clock, carrying his medical bag and wearing the confident smile of a man who thought his plan was working perfectly. He never expected to find Detective Maria Santos and 2 uniformed officers waiting for him in the foyer. "Dr. Richard Morse, you're under arrest for attempted murder and conspiracy to commit fraud," Detective Santos announced as the officers moved forward with handcuffs. Dr. Morse's face went white, and his medical bag crashed to the marble floor, spilling pill bottles and syringes everywhere. "There must be some mistake," he stammered. "I'm Mr. Henderson's physician. I'm trying to save his life, not harm him. We have recordings of your conversations with Elena Henderson detailing your plan to poison Mr. Henderson with inappropriate medications," Detective Santos replied calmly. "We also have medical evidence from Dr. Sarah Kim showing that the drugs you prescribed were slowly killing him." Elena came running down the grand staircase, her silk robe flowing behind her. When she saw the police, she stopped frozen on the steps. Margaret could see the moment when Elena realized their plan had been exposed. The elegant mask she always wore slipped away, revealing the cold calculation underneath. "Elena Henderson, you're also under arrest," Detective Santos announced, "for conspiracy to commit murder and fraud." Elena tried to run back up the stairs, but the officers were faster. As they handcuffed her, she screamed threats and accusations, claiming Charles was confused and Margaret had manipulated him. Her Spanish accent became thicker as she lost control, cursing everyone in the house. The Henderson children arrived within an hour of hearing about the arrests. David, Sarah, and Michael rushed in, expecting to comfort their father and take control of the situation. Instead, they found Charles sitting in his study with Margaret, looking stronger than he had in months now that the poisonous medications had been stopped. "Dad, what's happening?" Sarah asked, still trying to process the scene of police cars and news vans gathering outside. "Why was Elena arrested?" Charles looked at his children with a mixture of sadness and disappointment. "Elena and Dr. Morse were slowly poisoning me, planning to inherit my fortune and disappear together. But that's not the only deception this family has been living with." He handed each of them copies of the evidence that had been gathered about their own behavior. David's face crumpled as he saw the gambling records and theft documentation. Sarah became defensive, claiming her business dealings were perfectly legal. Michael tried to leave the room but found officers blocking the doorway. "You're all going to face consequences for your actions," Charles continued. "David, you'll be paying back every dollar you stole, and you're banned from any involvement in company operations. Sarah, your attempt to sell your shares to competitors violated your fiduciary duty and several contractual agreements. Michael, your embezzlement and theft charges are being filed with the district attorney's office this afternoon." The twins, Marcus and Maria, stood quietly in the corner, shocked by the revelations about their family members. They had known something was wrong, but never imagined the extent of the deception and betrayal. Charles then asked his lawyer, Mr. Jonathan Pierce, to read the real will aloud. The room fell silent as the true distribution of the Henderson fortune was revealed. The expressions on his children's faces changed from confusion to disbelief to anger as they realized they would not be inheriting the billions they had expected. "This is impossible," David shouted. "You can't leave everything to charity. We're your children. We have legal rights." "You have legal rights to a reasonable inheritance which you're receiving," Mr. Pierce explained. "Mr. Henderson has left each of his children from his first marriage $2 million, and the twins will receive $5 million each when they turn 30. The rest of the estate, approximately $7 billion, will go to the Henderson Foundation." Sarah immediately started calculating how to challenge the will, but Mr. Pierce continued with more shocking news. "The foundation will be managed by Margaret Williams, who has been appointed as the primary executor and foundation director. She will have complete authority over how the charitable funds are distributed." The room erupted in angry voices. David accused Margaret of manipulating their father. Sarah threatened legal action. Michael demanded to know how a housekeeper could be trusted with billions of dollars. Through it all, Margaret sat quietly beside Charles, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was happening. Charles raised his hand for silence. "Margaret has shown more integrity, loyalty, and wisdom in 23 years of service than any of you have shown in your entire lives. She understands the value of money because she's worked hard for everything she's ever earned. She's seen how wealth can corrupt people, and she has the judgment to use this fortune to help those who truly need it." Over the following days, the media attention was intense. The story of the billionaire, the murder plot, and the housekeeper who inherited billions became international news. Reporters camped outside the mansion, and Margaret found herself thrust into a spotlight she never wanted. Charles used his remaining strength to prepare Margaret for her new life. He introduced her to financial advisors, lawyers, and charity experts who would help her navigate the complex world of managing billions of dollars. Most importantly, he helped her understand the responsibility she was accepting. "This money isn't really yours," he explained during one of their final conversations. "You're the guardian of it. Your job is to make sure it goes to people and causes that will make the world better. You've seen how money can destroy families and corrupt people. Now you have the power to use it for good." Margaret spent hours reading about successful foundations and charitable organizations. She met with education experts, healthcare professionals, and community leaders who could help her understand where the money would have the greatest impact. The shy housekeeper who had quietly served the Henderson family was becoming a powerful force for change. Charles Henderson passed away peacefully 3 weeks after the arrests, with Margaret holding his hand. His final words to her were simple. "Remember why I chose you. Trust your heart, and don't let anyone convince you that you're not worthy of this responsibility." The funeral was a media circus. Elena and Dr. Morse watched from their jail cells as the man they had tried to murder was laid to rest. The Henderson children attended but kept their distance from Margaret, still angry about their reduced inheritance and her new role. The legal battles began immediately. David, Sarah, and Michael hired expensive lawyers to challenge the will, claiming their father was mentally incompetent when he made his final estate plans. However, the medical evidence from Dr. Kim showed that Charles had been mentally sharp once the poisonous medications were stopped, and the extensive documentation of his children's misconduct supported his decision to limit their inheritance. Elena and Dr. Morse were convicted of attempted murder and conspiracy. Elena received 15 years in prison, while Dr. Morse got 20 years and lost his medical license permanently. The Spanish property they had purchased and the Swiss bank accounts were seized and added to the Henderson Foundation's assets. 6 months after Charles's death, Margaret officially took control of the Henderson Foundation. Her first major decision was to create scholarship programs for immigrant children, inspired by her own journey from Jamaica to America. She also established small business loan programs and healthcare initiatives in underserved communities. The foundation's offices were located in a modest building downtown, far from the glittering towers where most billionaire foundations operated. Margaret insisted on keeping overhead costs low so that more money would go directly to helping people. She hired a diverse staff of people who understood the struggles of working families, immigrants, and small business owners. Within the first year, the Henderson Foundation had distributed over $200 million to various causes. Margaret personally reviewed every major grant application, ensuring that the money went to organizations that would use it effectively and honestly. She visited schools that received scholarships, met with families who benefited from healthcare programs, and celebrated with entrepreneurs who grew their businesses with foundation loans. The media attention gradually shifted from sensational headlines about the scandal to genuine admiration for what Margaret was accomplishing. She became known as the people's billionaire, someone who understood the real needs of ordinary families because she had lived that life herself. The Henderson children eventually accepted their circumstances, though their relationships with Margaret remained strained. David used his inheritance to pay back the money he had stolen and started a small construction company, working honestly for the first time in years. Sarah struggled with her reduced lifestyle, but eventually found satisfaction in managing smaller real estate projects. Michael spent his inheritance quickly and had to learn to live within his means, which proved to be a valuable lesson. Marcus and Maria, the twins, chose different paths. Marcus went to work for the foundation, helping Margaret identify worthy causes and manage grant programs. Maria used her business education to start a nonprofit organization that taught financial literacy to young people. Both seemed grateful for the lessons their father's final actions had taught them about the true value of money and integrity. Margaret moved out of the Henderson mansion and bought a comfortable but modest home in a diverse neighborhood where she felt connected to the community. She kept the same values and simple lifestyle that had earned Charles Henderson's trust, refusing to let wealth change who she was at her core. 5 years after Charles's death, Margaret stood before the United Nations, delivering a speech about global poverty and the responsibility of wealthy nations to help developing countries. The shy housekeeper from Jamaica had become an influential voice for social justice and economic equality. During her speech, she spoke about Charles Henderson and the lesson his life had taught her. True wealth isn't measured by how much money you accumulate, but by how much good you can do with whatever resources you have. Mr. Henderson gave me billions of dollars, but more importantly, he gave me the understanding that with great privilege comes great responsibility. The Henderson Foundation had grown to become one of the most respected charitable organizations in the world, known for its direct approach to helping people and its efficient use of resources. Margaret's background as a working person gave her insights that traditional philanthropists often lacked, and her decisions consistently supported programs that created lasting change rather than temporary relief. Margaret never forgot the night when Charles Henderson first asked for her help, or the trust he placed in her when everyone else in his life had betrayed him. She carried that responsibility with pride and humility, knowing that every dollar she distributed was a chance to honor the memory of a man who chose character over blood, integrity over tradition, and justice over family loyalty. The story of the billionaire and his housekeeper became a legend that inspired people around the world. It proved that true worth isn't determined by birth or social status, but by the choices people make and the values they live by. Margaret Williams, who had started as a young immigrant with nothing but hope and determination, became living proof that anyone can make a difference if they're given the opportunity and have the courage to use it wisely.